Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Barbara.
Welcome to week 73 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara with banana boxes in the background. We finished episode 352, originally aired Monday, December 16th, 1985. I wonder if my finals would have been over yet, or if I would have still had a few this week. Janice has a dream about someone stalking her, another one of these black room dreams that people have on Santa Barbara. Dylan tells her about the casino idea, and then she has a bikini photo shoot at the beach bar. And I said, well, it's December 16th, of course you're in a bikini at the beach. And then at the end she said, I'm cold, why do they always have these bikini shoots in the winter and the fur coats in the summer? So glad Janice noticed it was cold too.
And she gets left alone at the beach bar.
Both Nick and Dylan leave, or Nick and Warren leave. Was Dylan there too? I can't remember.
Because nothing bad has ever happened to a woman alone at the beach bar.
So that stalker, of course, was watching the photo shoot, and then they strung up a little yellow sheet so that she could change behind it. And somehow all the men abandoned the area while she was changing, and then we see a shadow approaching. She says, Warren? Nick? And does she scream at the end? I think she screams. Now, I had a weird thought. As part of my thoughts that had been percolating for a few weeks, it suddenly struck me, what if she's Mark McCormick's wife that he's been looking for?
I thought that was brilliant. What if Mark is the stalker?
Yeah.
And maybe there's a reason
he'll
she
just
left.
Or it's, the private detective, right?
Yeah,
That Mark has hired to look for her. And I guess her name wasn't Janice, so either Janice isn't her real name, or whatever name she told Mark she had isn't. I mean, it could be fake, but
it was like Wendy or something like that.
Yeah, it's just that just from the start of Mark's weird wife things, I've been trying to think, could there be some connection? And that just suddenly came together for me yesterday.
Yeah, you have to figure that introducing that kind of plot element, that story, Mark being introduced, or a love triangle with, involving Mason and Mary, of course, but then the whole story about his mysteriously missing wife. It has to have some payoff.
Yeah. Anyway, it'd be an interesting twist to it. So if she pulls that sheet back and it's Mark, then we'll know. But Mark might still be some super creepy, stocky ex-husband, right? So could be why she left.
Might be our next Antonio.
We may finally get another person in the cemetery, whether it's at Mark's hands or Mark himself. Cruz. Here's Eden talking over the bug about pulling the plug on Cece. And, Pearl's making his off-color comments while listening to the goings-on in the Capwell Cranston house. And at some point, I think Kirk says something to Eden, and Cruz just can't take it anymore and tries to burst in. But Pearl pulls him back and pulls him off to the side where the payphone is. And Cruz decides, what am I doing? I've wasted too many weeks on this. And after Kirk and Eden leave, he goes to remove the bugs from the room. And although Pearl tries desperately to keep a unexpectedly returned Eden from walking in, she walks in on Cruz right as he is removing the bug in the living room.
Yeah.
She makes some comments about, how many do you have in the bedroom? She says, I don't know what you're hoping to hear, that I didn't pull the plug on my dad. Well, I did pull the plug on him.
It's an explosive scene, as we would expect.
But Cruz, proposes his theory that it wasn't her. Do you really remember pulling the plug? And she says, well, Kirk told me what happened. And but then later, She goes to visit Cece, and she's thinking back, and she does seem to remember passing out just before her hand reached the plug, and she starts to question whether she really did it. Now, it's interesting that I think Kirk actually did suggest this to her once, didn't he? Like the first time he didn't tell her, because I think he thought he had more of a holdover, but I think he did suggest it once. So I think if she brings it up with him, he should run with it so she doesn't suspect him.
Yeah.
Cruz puts the beach house up for sale. Now this is funny because was it yesterday or today that we were talking about where Augusta and Julia could move in, and I had suggested Cruz could rent the beach house to them.
It'd be kind of cool if that happens. Although I don't know where he's going to live, because remember he put all his money into the beach house.
But he still has the houseboat. Because he let Amy and Brick honeymoon there, remember?
Yeah, I thought that was just before
sale went through. Maybe he rents it. Maybe he rents the houseboat.
So, I guess if did he put the thing up for sale, or is he renting it?
I thought he put for sale on that side.
Yeah, then he'd have some money.
But I don't know, maybe I saw him write 4, he painted 4, and then maybe I started typing, and I just assumed it was sale, so... We will clarify for you tomorrow if it's just up for rent. If it is, that would be perfect for Augusta. And then someday Cruz and Eden might move in there. Or Cruz and someone else that we'll get to at the end of this commentary. In Cece's room, Sophia says, "It's Christmas!"
So we've skipped Thanksgiving.
Well, it's interesting, because I thought it was one of those cases of, yesterday was Halloween and today's Christmas. But now that I think about it, it could well be 2 months later, right? Because Cruz said, I've let this go on for weeks, and he just planted the bug yesterday. So is it possible that it actually was a few days after after Halloween yesterday, but now it's a couple days before Christmas? Because Kelly conveniently left town to get her head together before answering Nick's question. So she comes back today, and it could easily have been 2 weeks instead of just half a day, or 2 months instead of just half a day. So far, I haven't seen it, and this could be a different photo shoot than the one Warren had talked about, in the last episode. There's a very clean break in between these episodes. It could be any amount of time to explain the jump.
Either way, poor old Brandon was being sent off to camp either in the middle of November or early December.
He wasn't around in this episode. Kelly comes in to tell her about the proposal and that she's been thinking about it, but she's not sure what to say. And Sophia relates the story of when Cece asked her to marry him. And she says, he only gave me 10 seconds and then started counting down. And his logic was that I would already know in my heart if the answer was yes or no. So, Kelly goes downstairs and tells Nick, yes, I'll marry you. Just don't force me to pick a date today. Yeah. He says, I'll wait 10 years.
She actually makes Nick basically go through the scenario that Sophia's described for her. And I know when you were asking me, I guess it was last week, after Kelly and Dylan had their tryst, and when Nick asked her to marry him. And I know you asked me what I thought Kelly would say, and I said, I don't know. And I actually think that Kelly maybe didn't know what she was going to say until this episode when she made Nick ask her again, and she went with the 10-second rule that
that's why she forced him to ask again.
Yeah. So I think she herself only knew her answer this episode.
Well, this news surprises Dylan. He's surprised that Kelly said yes. Then he and Nick tell her the casino idea, and of course she's surprised that Dylan has picked something that will keep him in town. Nick is really trying to sell this casino idea on Kelly, so he must have thought it over since yesterday and come up with all the positives. So after Nick, leaves the room to go to that photo shoot, Kelly says, I'm surprised you're staying in town. He says, you know me, once it's all up and running, I'll probably get bored after 2 weeks and leave town anyway. So that's his hope, that to keep him from sleeping with Kelly again. I don't think it's a very safe plan compared to the original one of him leaving town. Kirk arrives with a lot of objections that he didn't even mention yesterday. Several which I don't remember. The first one, he says, is somewhat disrespectable, unrespectable, is it? The project lacks some respectability, and that this company is, very straight arrow company, and it wouldn't fit with the portfolio. And he throws in a lot of other potential problems, including tidal waves. And I think we've seen some footage of some of these offshore rigs, maybe not in California, definitely that Gulf of Mexico, where these huge waves are beating away at these things. And Dylan says, "Oh, we'll have lifeboats." So I think Kirk, jokes about everyone having their own little life preserver assigned to them.
I think as much as anything, though, what really comes across in this conversation is Kirk's attitude. He's already very much acting like it's his company.
Kelly assures Dylan that although Kirk has a lot of power in the company, he's missing one thing: the surname Capwell. Well, maybe he'll change his name to Kirk Capwell.
Well, it'll be interesting. She, I think, says she's going to talk directly to Eden about it. So it'll be interesting to see, what the upshot of that is if she does so. If Kirk will kind of intervene and dissuade Eden from the idea, which I think could put some tension between Eden and Kelly, or if Eden backs Kelly, in which case that'll put even a little bit more tension between Eden and Kirk.
I mean, it almost makes it sound like Kelly wants Capwell to fund it as well.
Yeah.
Lionel arrives at Santana's, and at first I thought it was the Capwell house because they have the same fancy wooden door style at this apartment house. But the other thing that we noticed was that I think she seems to be on the ground floor now, because we could see some lovely yard of the apartment complex outside. So we're wondering if she moved down one floor, because some parts of her room seem to be the same, some to be more expansive. So
it seems to be the same apartment layout, basically.
But slightly
bigger,
though, too, I think. I think she didn't have that big back area where now there's, the glass doors out to the thing. And Lionel finds an area to hang the Christmas stocking, and I think I was looking for screenshots of Brandon up ahead, and actually that's where they put up the Christmas tree. So there's a bigger area back there that we may not have seen today. And Lionel has this giant stocking that he had made for himself as a kid that makes it admonished that he was gonna set the whole house on fire, hanging that over the fireplace. And so, of course, Santana and Lionel always get along. They talk about Brandon. Santana says, "Oh, he's always asking about when Gina's going to call." And she actually says, "I want him to love me more than Gina." And Lionel doesn't really say anything, but he should have probably said, it's not going to be likely, but, that's fine. He mentions that he would never try to take Brandon from her. So I think he's thinking ahead, if things get formalized with... maybe he put Brandon in his will or something, right? So he's probably thinking about something like that. If that Gina's probably an obstacle to something like that, but he's probably been thinking in that area. So he just wants to reassure her he's not going to try to pull something like Cece would. Then he says, "You should sue for custody," and she says, "Well, I'm a single parent." And he says, "Oh, you should get married." And then at one point she goes, "Is that a proposal?" But then they start talking about Cruz being single. So this is an interesting thought. What if Cruz and Santana get married just as Eden and Kirk get divorced? That would be, that seesaw thing of soap opera romances. So it's possible. They are both single, and Cruz seems to have given up on everything today. So that'd actually be interesting if, that would mean Santana wouldn't be leaving town again so soon, like last time when, it was kind of disappointing when she left the first time.
Well, we have seen sort of shades of the potential for that relationship all through the show, through each iteration of Santana. So
Yeah, so
It's
it would actually
possible.
be interesting if
Yeah.
they do. Even if they don't get married, they might start something. That'll be something that can be picked up on in the future. Sophia arrives and is surprised to find Lionel there, and almost immediately turns around to leave because I think she knows it's a bad idea to be in the same place as Lionel.
Yeah.
And he tries to turn her around by saying, "I'd like to buy you two ladies lunch," but she smartly leaves.
Yeah.
And runs into him at the doorway to the Capwell house later. And they wish each other a Merry Christmas and agree that they're friends.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think it's something that could inch forward the Sophia-Lionel relationship. Cece still in a coma, but potentially recovering with his grasping, clenching his fist yesterday or 2 months ago in Santa Barbara time.
Yeah.
All right. Be a few days before we see Brick again, I think, but we will hopefully have something exciting to talk about after we watch episode 353. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 353 of Santa Barbara. Originally aired Tuesday, December 17th, 1985. Kelly helps Dylan study for his meeting with Eden. She asks him all sorts of questions about his experience running the business and where all his profits went. He mentions that they crash-landed in the sea. Dylan tells Eden that he can keep costs down by not having to meet building codes and fire regulations. I immediately thought, I think we know how this casino story is going to end with a massive fire that hopefully will take Dylan off the show at the same time. So anyway, I'll put a quarter on the casino going up in flames someday.
Yeah, that sounds pretty dangerous to be on a oil ramp with a fire. I mean, we saw that the first couple weeks of this entire show.
And that may well be the rig that exploded that injured Maggie's husband, for all we know, and that's why it's out of use. But Eden, being the good capitalist, doesn't think that's a problem. In fact, seems to find that a plus. So they talk about him restoring the rig to its previous condition after the casino wraps up. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. You have more money than me. But Eden says basically it comes down to the fact that as the company is incorporated in California, they have to abide by California laws, even if the rig is off the coast, outside of the jurisdiction. So Dylan suggests that a way around that problem, if he were the owner of the rig rather than Capwell. And so he suggests buying it off them for $1 with an option to buy it back off him for the same amount 2 years later. Plus, he will throw in 20% of the casino's profits. Eden ends up later telling Kelly, I want 40%. So it sounds like she's up for that.
Yeah.
She did not have any issues with it like Kirk did. She just had a whole lot of questions that Dylan seemed to answer. Next thing we see Dylan, he's in an illegal crap game trying to raise the startup money. At first I thought it was with Angel, because I think the one guy was in Angel's gang that we saw. One of the
Yeah, he
the
looked
three
a
guys.
lot like him at first, at least from the original camera angle we saw.
So anyway, he loses all his money, but including his gold nugget, but somehow convinces them to lend him some money, and then he ends up winning $12,000 off them. Which, I don't know how you end an illegal crap game, because when one person loses all its money, you'd think that would be a reasonable time to end it. But then when one person wins all the money, it seems to Dylan that's the time to end it. So they're not too happy that he's won it all, and they think that the other guy that showed up, not Rooster, was in on it with him. But that's sort of drowned out by the fact that Kelly shows up and starts talking about the casino. And that prompts the one guy to say, "I thought I recognized you from Atlantic City. You're a ringer," which I don't really get because craps is craps. But there seemed to be some sort of insinuation that Dylan was cheating somehow.
Yeah, I was trying to figure that out. And I'm not a gambler, so I don't know quite how these things would work. But he kept saying, "Oh, it's just math," or something, like as if he was card counting. But obviously, you're not card counting with craps.
Mm-hmm.
So
he had a little cheat sheet of the odds, but I think most craps players know the odds. Plus, and anyway, there were a whole bunch of side bets, like, I think the final bet at the end was, "Oh, if I throw snake eyes, I'll put down, X amount of money." And he said, "And I want you to pay me back at 36-1, which are the true odds." And they said, "No, 30-1. So really, they had the advantage. So I don't see why they were the upset ones, since he threw a double one. Although there was some dodgy thing where the second die did not bounce off the back wall. And so that may have been part of the issue. Although if he supposedly had fake dice, then it wouldn't have really mattered, I don't think.
yeah, I would have thought the most obvious way to cheat at craps would be with loaded dice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so anyway, Kelly is either briefly taken hostage or something. Somehow the guys end up leaving with Dylan's $12,000, and Dylan is angry with Kelly and says, "Don't ever say that I owe you any money or anything. In fact, I think you owe Dylan this Nick this $12,000 that I was going to give him to pay him back for the money I owe. I never want to have anything to do with you." And Kelly says, "Oh, Eden wants us to work together." He says, "It's not safe to work with her." I don't know. He seems to be invoking the thugs that he himself brought into this little encounter, but he's probably meaning that it's not safe for them to be near each other for romantic reasons also.
Yeah, I think this is supposed to be one of these sort of high-passioned, sexy, angry fights.
Mm-hmm.
Which maybe it is if you're really into shipping Kelly and Dylan.
I wonder if there are any people. I should put up a poll. We haven't had a poll on our site. No. Maybe I should. Eden asks Kirk if he's sure that she's the one who pulled the plug. And he says, "I'm the one who originally suggested that maybe you didn't do it." So he seems a little bit annoyed that she now seems to be implying that he hid something from her when in fact it was his idea. But he says, "Have you been talking to Cruz?" Because clearly he thinks that's what put this in her head. Kirk tells Eden he's willing to move into the Capwell mansion. This is an interesting thing because he lives in a dumpy apartment, and I too would be willing to move into the Capwell mansion. So
it's kind of almost shades of Peter Flint and his crappy little studio apartment.
Mm-hmm. But there seems to be undertones already with Kirk and Eden as some of Mason's maybe comments, or just the general tone being that Eden might be undercutting his manhood by being richer and more powerful in the company and now living in her father's house. So I think that's just been touched on minorly, maybe not in the dialogue, but just with the situations. But I have a feeling that it's going to ramp up.
Well, we do get, and maybe you'll go into this a bit more, but we do get an interesting exchange with him and Mason, where Kirk steps forward and says, "Well, I'm the man of the house now," which is a pretty insane thing, actually, for him to say to any of the Capwells, especially Mason, who is the oldest. And Mason kind of just takes it in stride as a challenge. But you can see Eden watching this from the background, and I don't think she quite hears what is being said, but I think she's actually kind of alarmed by whatever she's getting from seeing that conversation.
Well, Mason interestingly counters with, "No, Cece's the man of the house."
Yeah.
And I think he says, "Right, Eden?" Because she's in the doorway by that point, but she doesn't respond. So yeah, maybe as you said, she didn't quite hear the whole conversation before she came out of Cece's room.
but it will be interesting because I feel like Kirk's gonna really try to push Mason out, which I'm sure Eden would be happy to push him out, but I'm not sure he's going to play the right card in beating up Mason, even though all the Capwells have a lot of issues with each other. I don't know if Eden is necessarily going to jump straight onto Kirk's side against Mason.
That's interesting. Kirk's been mainly focused on Eden and getting into Capwell, but maybe if he puts his mind to it, like Gina did with getting Eden out of the way, he might actually start coming up with a scheme to get Mason out of the company. So maybe we don't know if Kirk is beyond doing the equivalent of what Gina did to Cece. We haven't really seen him do anything necessarily evil yet, have we? We've just seen him be very snarky.
Kirk and Gina would make an interesting axis of evil as well.
If Kirk catches wind that Gina and Mason are fighting, maybe he could say, look, I've got some power in the Capwell Company, but I need some dirt on Mason that I can use to get him out. Can you help me? And Gina might have something, that she would offer just out of spite for Mason.
Yeah. But, one thing we have seen throughout the series so far is that Capwells will fight each other. But then, as we saw with the earthquake, Cece calls on Mason to make sure Brandon's all right. It's Mason who kind of heads up the rescue of Sophia and Lionel, and Mason who's called in to defend Ted against the rape charges. So, and all this, they're always kind of fighting and backbiting and stabbing each other in the background, but they also call on each other in times of need as well. So I think Kirk is definitely misjudging things a little bit if he just assumes everyone's going to automatically turn against Mason or favor him over Mason.
I think if Kirk pulls something, he'd have to hide in some way that he is the instigator and make it seem like it came from a third location.
Yeah.
We've just recently had some Santa Barbara-like things happening in the news here in Canada with the Rogers Communications family battling over control of the board, and the older brother pulling out a document that says that he had the right to fire the board that had tried to oust him. So it was very much, in my opinion, like that board meeting we had where Eden and Mason kept pulling out different clauses from the bylaws and things to try and one-up each other.
Yeah, very much like Succession.
Never heard of it. Mason gives Mary some flowers for Christmas, and she dumps them in the atrium, saying, oh, someone might like these. He says that someday she'll make someone a great ex-wife, and it's during one of these arguments that Kirk comes out and says, hey, pipe down, I'm the head of the house. Mary helps Mark paint his apartment, and at one point, they end up taking all their clothes to the laundromat. I think I missed why.
They dumped paint.
Probably. Yeah. So Mary continues her painting wearing Mark's bathrobe. And Mason shows up there to yell at Mary some more, and sees her in Mark's bathrobe, and immediately jumps to the wrong conclusion and said, whatever happened to waiting until you're married? And Mark tries to set him straight, but Mary stops him and says, it's not really any of your business. Get out. So she lets him to believe that, since, she doesn't care what he thinks, or at least says that out loud.
Yeah, and Mason says something like, well, I'm not going to pursue you anymore, that's it. And then we get Mary saying to Mark afterwards that she really thought they'd get back together. So,
until today.
Yeah.
Mason then pops up to ask Gina why she confessed to being addicted to these very non-addictive pills. And she said, "Oh, they are addictive. I mean, I don't know. You don't know much about addiction." And Mason doesn't buy that. And then later, Gina pops up with a brilliant story. She said, "Oh, I looked at this label a little further. These are the wrong pills. These aren't the ones I'm addicted to. You found these other ones that I use as sleeping pills. And I just assumed you found the super addictive ones that I had hidden also in my room, which I've now destroyed. So I can't show you them." So this is one of several times where someone's come up with a really good excuse. I think Kirk did once with the shoes, right? On the fly, that on the surface of it seems to be quite reasonable. Although with Gina, the 3-hour gap, makes it a bit suspicious, but it's kind of funny. So Mason's maybe been deterred a bit, but I think he still has, the pharmacist maybe to go to that might give him a little hint of what's really going on.
Yeah, although if we think about how Gina obtained her pills before, which is how she got entangled with Hank Judson again, she could say she got them illegally, and so then that's why there wouldn't be a record of them.
I mean, I really thought, Mary said a bunch of things about, how these pills react with alcohol, etc. Like, she laid some clues there that if Mary had, Mason had only thought, oh, that's how Gina was if Mason had only thought that's how Eden was acting, when she said she hadn't had much to drink. So he has that in his head, maybe either with further conversation with Mary, or even if he goes to the pharmacist and has the same conversation he already had with Mary, but that pharmacist might just say, oh yeah, if someone took even one small glass of alcohol with this, they might put a sword to their brother's neck or something, and that would somehow Mason will put together that it was Eden who had that pill in her system, something like that.
I think Mason was sort of starting to consider those ideas and then got distracted by the whole Mary thing.
Yeah, if it went for Mary, he might be putting things together a little faster.
Yeah.
And now it's Christmas, so he's got all that to worry about too. Janice screams, and the sheet is pulled back to reveal Warren Lockridge.
And Warren's back in his ugly shirt that we saw him in. Oh, I think it was way back when he and Ted were still quarreling. He spent several weeks wearing this plaid shirt with these fake leather zippers on the pocket. Which I remember thinking at the time I would have thought a Lockridge could have afforded a nicer shirt.
Well, he loves it so much. It's back in his rotation.
Yeah, it's just a difference in taste, I guess.
She says that she thinks someone has been stalking her, and she asks him for a ride to the Orient Express, where she's going to meet Dylan for lunch. 90 minutes later, she and Warren are still hanging out. Dylan is a no-show, and Warren kind of asks her about the relationship with Dylan, and she pretty much says it's over, and doesn't reveal that he's in love with Kelly, but keeps making hints that he isn't in love with her, and Warren indicates that he might be interested in her himself. And speaking of people interested in Janice, Mason spots her, comes on over and ends up offering to give her a ride home, and next thing we know, he's barging in behind her into Sally's apartment. She picks up an envelope off the floor which has the proofs from the photo shoot, and Mason takes it upon himself to look over her shoulder while she browses through them and make perhaps inappropriate comments about them. Janice immediately knows that Mason wants to sleep with her, and she kicks him out and goes, "Oh, we'll come back with a wittier banter next time." And she says, "You may think you want to sleep with a sex object or whatever it is in your head, but that's not what you want." And then she kicks him out. So she's quite insightful about these things. As Mason leaves, a shadow falls across the window in the door of the apartment building. So we still have this shadowy figure. Thought we would see who it was today, but I guess maybe they'll push it off for several weeks. Who knows?
I wanted to just note too that we actually got a really nice little scene with Eden and Kelly in this episode as well. And this is just after Kelly and Dylan pitch the casino idea to Eden and Kirk. And Dylan goes his way, and Kirk, I can't remember if Eden kicks him out or what. But anyway, Eden and Kelly have a little chat. And I think Eden, I think she notices a bit of chemistry between Kelly and Dylan. And Kelly mentions about Nick asking her to marry him, and her asking her to marry him. And, that she said yes. And Eden says something to her like, well, make sure you really want to marry him. And you can just see, the scene's very well acted with both of them, the sort of pain that Eden is going through in trying to see through this marriage with Kirk.
But she also says, if you do really want to marry him right away.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, because now Kelly really has to think that through. And if she does think she wants to marry Nick, maybe we will have a rushed wedding. Well, it's December now, and sweeps are in February, so it's really only a little over a month. So in theory, we could have a Nick and Kelly wedding in February if she opts for that. She decides to have an affair with Dylan, all bets are off.
Well, it actually almost a little bit echoed the conversation Kelly had with Sophia, where Sophia basically said, if he asks you to marry him, you should you should know the answer, and she talks about how Cece gave her 10 seconds to give an answer. And so Eden's almost echoing that and saying, well, if you're going to marry him now. You should be sure enough.
Maybe Kelly thinks she wants what she thinks she wants, but doesn't really. So that could be a problem with that. She's maybe making decisions that aren't really what she wants. Well, it's Christmas still. We'll have more Christmas things happening in the next little while. And the next episode will be Wednesday, December 18th. So it would have been the last week of exams at Okanagan College. We'll be back after we've watched episode 354. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
I'd be careful if I were you, Eden. I think he wants to keep you in a pumpkin shell, subject to no influence but his own.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 354 of Santa Barbara, originally aired Wednesday, December 18th, 1985. Nick is annoyed with Dylan for losing all that money at the crap game, and for endangering Kelly. Dylan is uncomfortable watching Kelly kiss Nick. Kelly makes sure not to be alone with Dylan at any point. Dylan is now obsessed with scratch-off lottery tickets. Now, as we all know, in the real world, no one ever wins, but somehow Dylan manages to win $1,000. And he gives it to Nick to buy an engagement ring for Kelly, which he gives her, and gives another opportunity for Dylan to watch Kelly and Nick kissing. Santana finds Cruz putting the beach house up for sale. He apparently forgot to cancel Santana's appointment with Eden to decorate the beach house. Next thing we know, Santana's making him lunch. She's making him traditional Mexican chicken stew with cumin. Right while we were watching that, a Mexican person called us, so it was a good synchronicity. She makes him lunch and then gives him a haircut. And then, at one point, says she'll make his Christmas memorable.
I actually I've always liked Cruz and Santana together. I know the uber couple on this show is Cruz and Eden, but I've always thought that Cruz and Santana make a nice couple too, because they're friends already, and you can see that in their interactions with each other.
Yeah. This whole day with Santana turns Cruz around.
Yeah.
He tells her, you can bring Brandon by anytime, because we have the beach right here. And then later we see Brandon and Cruz carrying in a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
So Cruz ends up taking down the for sale sign. So yeah, I think we'll have probably some Christmas scenes here. Santana's place also probably has a Christmas tree.
And it's kind of a nice contrast, actually. Cruz having this kind of nice experience with Santana, whether it leads to anything or not. And, of course, all the subsequent scenes we'll see with Eden and Kirk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kirk and Eden move into the mansion, much to Mason's annoyance. "Are you here so you can try again?" he asks Eden. They pretend not to know what he's talking about. And Kirk says that this is the best thing for Eden, and that he can do all the things for her while she attends to Cece. And Mason says, "Eden, I think he wants to put you in a pumpkin shell." Kirk discovers that Eden has prearranged separate twin beds for them in her old room. So I assume it's her old room. I don't think we ever saw Eden's room. Mm-hmm. It's huge, by the way. And he says, between the staff and Mason snooping around, this doesn't look good for our, marriage. So she says, well, we can push them together.
Now, I was thinking during this scene, how weird would it be if we moved in with your dad and we're, living in your old bedroom, which also has twin beds?
It does. So Mom put all the extra furniture over the years.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a strange thing for a marriage, especially one that's just starting off and it's supposed to be in its honeymoon phase.
Kirk decides they need to get Mason out of that house somehow. That's one wish your father had that we can try to carry out. Mason asks Eden if she's pregnant, and she says, of course not. He goes, well then, maybe Kirk blackmailed you into marrying him because he knows that you're the one who pulled the plug on Dad. Later, when Eden's alone with Cece, later a vase falls, smashes off Cece's nightstand, and Eden's the first one in. But then Kelly and Mason run in after Mason, clearly worried that Eden has tried to kill Cece again.
Yeah, and you can see that Kelly's actually got that worry too. She and Mason have, they're still sparring in this episode with her basically accusing Mason of being very cynical and not giving Kirk much of a chance. And I think Mason probably seen Kirk a little more for what he is, but they are both they both come up to the bedroom together when they hear the vase, and you can see in their face they're both a little concerned about Eden being there, and of course the vase has fallen right next to the plug, so she's kneeling there looking at the vase.
Right, and that looks very suspicious. The nurse just says, oh, that's odd.
Yeah.
No one considers the possibility that Cece reached out and knocked the vase off accidentally.
Yeah, that's what would seem
Clearly
to be
has
the
happened.
case. Yeah.
When do you think Cece will wake up? Kelly says everyone would be happy if he woke up in time for Christmas. Mason says, yeah, except for the person who pulled the plug on him.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because, I think the first dramatic sort of sense of Cece waking up was actually a while ago when he was lying there with his eyes open. Mm-hmm. And that was in some ways even more dramatic than him, moving his hands or even clenching his fist. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping for another moment like that before we actually have him waking up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If it happened while Gina was in there, she might put him under again.
Yeah.
To Mason's annoyance, Kirk buys a Christmas tree. And he says the Capwells have always trimmed a blue spruce for centuries. So their tradition has been broken by this new usurper, Kirk Cranston. Mason says he marries her on a Monday, moves in on Tuesday, and on a Wednesday he's ordering our Christmas trees. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Barbara. Mason tells Kirk and Eden that Cruz is going back to the police department, but he's been pulled off Cece's case. So Eden is very worried that the new person will find all the evidence and put her in jail. But Kirk says that she has a tight alibi. So I guess we don't know any other people in the police force except Maggie, who apparently is still in New York. So I guess maybe we'll see a new person who's put on the case. Hey, what about that guy who was brought in to solve the Carnation Killer case.
Yeah, he was very much doing a character actor thing. He had, a book in his pocket, and I think he had a pipe or something at one point.
He was very good, though I don't think he solved it.
No. I remember he had a very strong, he was trying out a very strong accent the first episode he appeared in, and then he kind of let it go after that. But yeah, it would be interesting to see him again.
So at some point, since the last time we saw him, Nicholas Coster was in a very bad car accident and was, as he mentioned on the cruise, that he was very close to death. So today, the voiceover said,
Today, due to the illness of Nicholas Coster, the role of Lionel Lockridge will be played by Don Stewart.
And we have seen Don Stewart once or twice on things like Adam 12 and Dragnet 67.
I thought he did a nice job. He didn't try and be Nicholas Coster.
No.
Was kind of, he did I would say, a more low-key portrayal of Lionel, but I think that really, I think that really helped to move the story along. I didn't find it distracting. Yeah,
I think Lionel's role today was so important that they couldn't just bump it up, and because of the the other storylines moving forward at breakneck speed, they really couldn't push any of the storylines into the future, so they needed someone to do Lionel's dialogue, and we'll see how long Nick Coster is gone, and if there's any obvious sense, like with Jack Lee, of them pushing storylines back to accommodate that. I like the fact that they said explicitly up front that it's due to illness, because that could really freak someone out if suddenly there's someone else is playing Lionel and he's their favorite character and they have no idea what's going on. Why was Nicholas Coster replaced? So I think they did that once on with Donna Love on Another World, which assuages the fears and probably reduces the number of phone calls to the network switchboard.
Yeah, because in the past we've seen, this character will be played today by such and such, but this was very specific. And interestingly enough as well, they've actually reintroduced Gina twice. Yeah,
the second time she made her appearance, they once again said it, I guess, for people who hadn't seen the previous one.
Yeah.
And Lionel comes to the Perkins house. His coat is very long. I wonder if they shoved him into Nicholas Coster's coat, but he seems to be a little more slight than Nicholas Coster. So he apologizes to Brick and Amy for everything Augusta did and what he did too, because he kind of, egged it on a bit by, playing Brick's victim in all this, financial stuff that Brick was getting to do for Minx. He asks if there's anything he can do to make it up to him. And Brick says, can you take out an ad in the paper? And Lionel says, sure. I mean, his son happens to own a paper, so that's handy. Lionel helps them with Johnny. He and Brick fold diapers at one point. Although, as soon as Brick leaves, Lionel runs out the door after folding 3 diapers. But he says, I haven't done this since Lincoln was a baby. Lionel also offers to help when he hears Brick's plan to go to the hospital to look at his birth records, because he says, I've hit a stone wall. And Lionel says, Minx.
I think at this point Lionel would like to know, probably almost as much as Brick, what's really going on here as well.
Yeah, because, it's obviously his mom has a secret, and she's the matriarch of the Lockridge family.
And she has, in the past, done a lot for Brick. And I think if it was my family, I would be kind of interested in why as well.
Yeah, I remember Gus and him discussing what the possibilities could be. Dylan has placed a classified ad to attract investors. Kelly tells Mason that Eden has accepted Dylan's casino proposal. So that's going ahead. Good. They built a big, expensive set. Kirk says, I don't think you'll get many investors. And Mason says, "There's a sucker born every minute." Cut to Lionel Lockridge reading the paper and spotting the ad for casino investors and immediately calling to make an appointment. I think they've probably said it before, but I managed to write it down this time. The Lockridge phone number is 555-9878. I think when Lakin and Ted were dating, that number was mentioned once. He gets to, he doesn't seem to be surprised when it's Nick's voice on the answering machine, and he actually knows Nick, so I guess he saw the Hartley name, so thought it must be his relative. He tells Dylan that he wants to invest a substantial amount in this casino. If you will secretly hire Brick Wallace in some capacity. And Dylan says, "Brick Wallace, the embezzler?"
So this, to me, I know you've been traumatized by the word Santa Rosa in Dills for the last 36 years. I don't find it as traumatic, but to me, this one line confirmed to me that Dylan is the absolute worst of any character who's ever appeared on Santa Barbara. Because if we just do a quick highlight reel of some of the things Dylan's done, he's basically shafted his brother for 3 years. He's been doing possibly illegal things in Africa. He steals a map, perhaps. It wasn't really ever clear to me if there was any reason to think he might have actually conned Carlos's family out of it, but there is that possibility. At the very least, he is hanging out with very shady people since he does know Carlo. And he brings all the trouble back to Santa Barbara, almost has Kelly killed in the process. And of course, as we know, sleeps with Kelly, then reneges on his promise to leave Santa Barbara, and now he's trying to raise money for this shady casino, and his main selling point is that they will not have to adhere to California safety standards because it's offshore. Mm-hmm. Which also, I think, begs the question, which we haven't really thought about, and not to get overly woke about it, but what kind of person does manage and own an illegal gold mine in Africa? Mm-hmm. I could see 20 years from now an expose of the Dylan Hartley Mining Company on 60 Minutes because he's basically polluted all of their water and is running slave labor, basically, to mine it.
With footage of the burning casino in the background.
Exactly.
I mean, now we'll have Lionel on there when it catches fire. We'll have Brick on there when it catches fire. We'll have half the cast either living or working there or attending what we were thinking was, well, it would be funny if it burned down on the grand opening day instead of, when the storylines played out in a few months. Or half a year, probably in groups of 3 months.
So his, sudden pearl clutching over Brick being accused of embezzlement? Yeah. No.
Lionel better get that thing in the paper soon. Mason tells Kelly that she's impressed with that enterprising young man she's been hanging out with. And then she's shocked to find out he's talking about Dylan. She says, "I do not hang out with Dylan." So very over-the-top protesting about how close she and Dylan are. And Mason actually mentions he might invest in the casino. So now we'll have Mason on there. And I can see Mason not being a hands-off investor. I can see him marching around giving orders for things to be changed and things.
I think this is a delicious possibility of Lionel and Eden and Mason all investing in this thing together.
Mm-hmm. And being business partners with Lionel,
Yeah.
Capwells and Lionel and the Capwells. At the hospital, Brick and Amy meet Mrs. Matilda Cordell, who drops her papers when she hears them introduce themselves. She quickly composes herself and keeps finding ways to delay Brick by saying, you can't have those documents, they're hospital property. Oh, well, the other nurse said we could. Well, she's new here. Says, well, maybe I better talk to the person who runs the hospital. You probably could get your papers, but you have to fill out this form. And so she sends them into another room to fill out that form so she can call Minx Lockridge and tell her that the day they have dreaded has finally arrived. And this gives them time to plot a bit. And when Brick comes back with a filled out form, she says, all right, it'll take an hour for these papers to be gotten. And then later she comes back and says, well, turns out they've been sent to the archives, which are much harder to access, and so come back tomorrow. And they say they'll be there first thing. But as soon as they leave, we see that Matilda actually has the documents in her bag, and she pulls out 4 manila folders, this time with actually fancy sticker labels on the top, unlike the usual black marker we're used to on Santa Barbara. And the top one has, I assume it said Barnaby Brawls, not Brick Wallace. And the other 3 names are very tantalizingly hidden from view from us. Mm-hmm. And she calls Minx Lockridge and says, I don't know what I'll do. I'll probably just change the names or something. And then she says, Mrs. Lockridge, you're doing what? And that is a cliffhanger, so I don't know what Minx said she was going to do.
I took it that Minx was ordering her to actually destroy the records.
Well, the phrase is, you're going to do what? So, I assume we'll finally see Minx again tomorrow?
Yeah. And
maybe she's going to march right down to the hospital and burn them herself.
And I am also wondering whether Brick and Amy really have gone home or not.
Do you think they suspect? Because she was acting so suspicious compared to the other nurse.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking, Brick and Amy have some experience in this area because they had to go through hospital records and everything when Johnny was born.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if they've decided to do some kind of late night raid on the files themselves or something like that. So that's a possibility.
That would be fun. Break into Mrs. Cordell's office and find the papers in her, in her drawer. That's a good idea. Yeah, he's probably like, hey, I remember a morgue attendant who had this same vibe. And how did that turn out?
Or, another thought I had was that, she's so upset over, because whenever she talks to Minx, she's like, oh, I've got this career, she seems to be really worried about her integrity. I wonder if it could be a step too far and she actually talks to Brick. That would be kind of interesting as well.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Does she seem old enough to have been around, let's say 26 years ago, when Brick was born and working at the hospital?
Maybe an easily bribed records
Candy
assistant
striper?
or something. Yeah, I don't know.
Wow, well, that is it. A lot happened in this episode. A lot of people moving around. It was hard to deconstruct in a clean way. I ended up with a lot of back and forths, but this was fun. And leading into Christmas, I think the Brick storyline will run headlong into its conclusion. We had credits today. Now, last time in the credits, I don't know if I mentioned it, but the obvious, Linda Gibney was out and Robin Matson was in as Gina Capwell. Today, an interesting thing. I assume it was an error, but both Linda Gibney and Robin Matson were credited as Gina in this set of credits. Mm-hmm. And the only thing I can think of is maybe they were originally going to use the original tape recording of Linda Gibney, but they actually had Robin Matson redo the tape recording that Mason has. So I assume it's just an error, or they realized she still had 3 days on her contract and legally should have been in the credits or something like that. So, and Eden is now listed as Eden Capwell Cranston. And we have, Hiram Cladigan was in the last ones, but he was just a one-timer. And in the non-regular credits section, we have Brandon Call as Brandon Capwell, Laura Staley as nurse at hospital, to differentiate herself from 2 other nurses that were in Cece's room. Mrs. Cordell was Jill Andre, and Lionel Lockridge, Don Stewart. And missing from the credits is Charles Bateman. He apparently is no longer on contract at Santa Barbara. I think we saw our last episode from him a few weeks ago.
I think so too.
Now, does that mean that they've cast a new Cece? They must have told him at this point that he was no longer working, and from that story Jed Allen told about running into him where he thought he was still playing Cece, they must have told him at this point that he wasn't, but they already have Jed Allen set to go. But it's interesting that they are still dragging it out a little bit because Cece is still in a coma. And I think they just want to position everyone just right with their various wills and legal documents and legal standing in the household and in Capwell Enterprises before Cece wakes up and tries to knock down as many of those pins as he can. Assuming he doesn't have amnesia, or he does remember Gina pulling the plug, or maybe he thinks Eden pulled the plug. He could have been totally out of it, you know?
Also, I feel like they want to get the casino storyline set up and ready to go. So we've got all the investors in place.
I still think it's a bit quick to have our New Year's Eve there, so. But maybe between Christmas and New Year's, suddenly the whole casino will be decorated. Oh, Santana could get a job decorating the casino.
And I think we also want to have a sense of where Brick is really standing on all this, too.
When he runs a casino, what will his last name be?
Exactly.
Well, that's it for a Wednesday show. We are going to watch, probably in a few minutes, we're going to watch episode 355. And maybe do another podcast today to catch up. So we'll see you after we watch the Thursday, December 19th episode of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
There were 4 babies born the same day as Barnaby Wallace.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 355 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Thursday, December 19th, 1985. Kelly finds out that Dylan provided Nick with the money for her ring. She has kind of an odd look on her face when she discovers that. Knowing that Gina is listening, Kirk asks Mary to repeat to him what she saw that night. He says to Gina it's convenient that Brandon is her only alibi. And then finally Kirk tells Gina he thinks she pulled the plug on Cece.
And we see a really kind of interesting combination of cat and mouse and axis of evil alliance building in this episode between Kirk and Gina.
They both sort of talk about how they both hate Mason, and then I guess they talk about maybe they can both do something about that.
I think for starters. But Kirk also mentions about how Gina must also hate CC as well, so he's kind of cottoned on to that tense relationship as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if other avenues come out in this relationship.
I think Gina's probably worried that Kirk is going to reveal, everything he knows or suspects in order to save Eden, little knowing that perhaps the exact opposite might be true.
Yes.
That he might be willing to, have an alliance with her, or maybe get her to do something in exchange for not revealing what he's figured out, or, help him with his schemes. Not that we know that he has any schemes. It just seems like a guy who has schemes, doesn't he?
I suspect he's got
he looks so
some
schemy.
kind of schemes. Yeah.
I really like the way that Kirk is played, because you just feel like something shady is going on with him, even though there's no overt evidence. Right?
Yeah.
Janice glares at Dylan regarding his overt interest in Kelly every time they're in the room together, and Janice is like, I'm the only one who knows, but it's so obvious. Janice invites Mason over after the rest of the gang has left, and Mason flips through her pictorial as part of their evening together while she gets cheese and crackers. Janice tells Mason that she wants to be an actress, and then she gets angry with him for suggesting she should stick to modeling. He didn't quite say it that way, but it was like, oh, you've already got this lucrative career, why risk it, you know?
I was almost wondering if that was something that Lane Davies was kind of channeling as well to the one that Lane
So she kicks him out, and the stalker approaches. But luckily Mason returns to apologize.
Yeah.
He offers to give Janice a makeup kiss. And after the kiss, she says, that's not a makeup kiss. And she says, maybe you should decide who you're kissing, me or Mary. Now, I get the feeling from the way Janice is that she's the kind of person who just lets people go a little too far without saying, you know, really what her boundaries are. So maybe this is how she gets in trouble in the past. Mason and Mary argue about such things as Mary clearing his dishes while he was still eating, and Mary working on Christmas decorations for the clinic at the Capwell house.
Which she's kind of doing all through the episode. She's kind of working away on these little Christmas trees.
It's lucky they appear to have now 3 nurses, so Mary can do... I mean, the fact that Mary's job includes clearing dishes is bizarre, right? I mean, it's like, once you're a servant of the Capwells, you do anything they want. It's the way it seems. Like, I can understand her clearing Cece's dishes, but not, you know, cleaning up around the atrium.
I was almost kind of wondering if she was just doing that to kind of be around Mason without obviously being around Mason.
Oh.
Because she does seem to be, I mean, that obviously is his work table. He's got all his stuff set up. And, you know, and she's basically spends most of the episode hanging around that table, working on her decorations.
That's right, she's working on her decorations, handmade decorations at that same table that Mason always works at. Which, you know, if you've ever tried working at a dining room table, let alone what looks almost like it's got the same dimensions as like a patio furniture, it's really not comfortable height-wise between the chairs and the tables. I would think Cece's study would be the most comfortable, you know.
Yeah.
But I guess, you know, Mason maybe likes to hang around with, you know, have people come by and such, even if it's all family members that hate him. Mary goes to lunch with Mark, who's not actually in this episode, but she makes a date with him by phone, leaves at one point, comes back, and then it's Gina's turn to talk to Mary. She reiterates to Mary that Mason took her baby, well, her son, Brandon, and tells her she must be happy to be free of Mason.
And I kind of got the feeling with this little exchange that Gina's kind of trying to find a way to maybe play Mary a little bit, which frankly isn't that difficult, that she's trying to maybe build some alliances there. Don't know why. You know, maybe it's to wreck any possibility of Mary having a relationship with Mason. That's certainly possible, or for whatever reason. But I felt like Gina's kind of gone out of her way this episode to bring Mary onto her side.
I wonder if Gina still has any interest in Mason, or if he's burned that bridge.
Or if she's just pure revenge at this point for him. You know, with the situation with Brandon, and also for making her feel a bit foolish by obviously preferring Mary. So,
Cruz brings Santana a tree, making up for the one that they brought him yesterday. And they decorate it with Brandon. At one point, Brandon's on Cruz's shoulders and putting the angel on the top of the tree, and Santana says, oh, I like this picture. So she's really picturing them as a family already.
And we do get a different Brandon today, do we not?
That's right. Brian Ottenreith is playing Brandon for several episodes this week. Brandon Call actually comes back and then leaves again for a day. Obviously, it's the holidays, so he probably didn't want to spend all his time on set when, you know, he's been working and going to school. So that's probably the reason they got someone else in for the holidays. Brian Ottenreith previously played young Marcello. And I didn't believe it when I read that on IMDb, but from the spotlight I did on him, I got some clips and photos, and it's quite clearly the same kid. He's lost at least one tooth right at the front. So Gina arrives with some presents, and Cruz and Brandon go out for a soccer game, and Gina says that she's going to fight Santana for Brandon. And then later Santana asks Cruz to help her get Brandon. But Cruz follows that up with, well, whatever's best for Brandon. So I think Cruz thinks the obvious that, Gina's probably the best choice for Brandon.
Just because he's already grown up with him. And Gina, for whatever her many flaws, does have, one really big thing in her favor, which is that she does genuinely love Brandon.
Brick, Nick, Kelly, Dylan, Amy, and Sam go out to the oil rig. Dylan has asked Brick to do all the financial work for the casino, and he's already jumped right in with thoughts on prime mortgage rates and lending rates and things like that. Nick decides that Kelly should turn some of Dylan's ramblings about his vision into some sketches. This causes Kelly to have a fantasy about dancing with Dylan at the finished casino, and someone is playing it as time goes by on the piano, so she's thinking of it sort of as a modern day Rick's Place, I guess. Dill's Place? Oh, I hope they don't call it that. So everyone basically, actually one person wants to head back to the mainland, and by the end of the conversation everyone's decided they need to get back for some reason, and Kelly says to Nick, well, I'll be fine here alone doing my sketches, just send Sam back to get me in a few hours. So she's sketching away at her ideas, looking around the space, and she thinks Sam comes back, but it's actually Dylan, who didn't realize she had been left there alone, and which is odd, because didn't they all take the same boat? But he's brought champagne. He said he was going to christen the oil rig on his own, but since Kelly's there, she might as well do it. So they find a suitably chunky piece of machinery to smash the champagne bottle against, and Kelly cuts her hand. She is very reticent to let Dylan know this because she knows that the very next thing that will happen, which is exactly what happens, is that he will grab her hand, and she suddenly gets all weak as far as I can tell. So they're stuck on an oil rig together, but no blankets this time, so maybe nothing will happen. It's just a lot of greasy machinery. Brick and Amy have returned from the rig and headed for the hospital to get their documents. Actually, I think that may have happened at the beginning of the episode before they went to the rig. Mrs. Cordell tells them, you know what? They were destroyed in a fire. And they pretend to play along, but Brick says to Amy, if that were the case, she would have known yesterday that they were not going to be available. So she thinks there's something fishy already. Or Brick thinks there's something fishy already. So Brick and Amy break into the hospital records room later that day.
Called that?
They find a very old-looking... Yes, exactly, just as you had predicted. They find a very old-looking filing cabinet. So very believable as a 1960s filing cabinet. Or 50s. No, sorry, I forget how old people are. It would be like 61, so 50s era one. Or plus or minus. Not exactly sure how old Brick is. And guess what? All the records for the day he was born are missing. So that's suspicious, because the fire was supposedly had destroyed half a filing cabinet, and here's the day before and the day after, perfectly fine. Guess where Mrs. Cordell is? She has brought the files over to Minx. So actually, Minx is in throughout this episode on the phone with Mrs. Cordell earlier on, but now in the middle of the episode, she gets the files brought to her, and Mrs. Cordell is like really not 100% on board with all this. She's worried about, about what would happen if it's discovered, and Minx says, well, in an institution that big, mistakes happen all the time, As soon as you leave here, no one will really be able to trace anything, which is probably true. Mink finds a photo of newborn Brick in the folder and tells him she loved him since the moment he was born and kisses the photo. But then she burns all the files of all 4 babies born that day and takes one final look at the photo and burns it too. So she's really worried about this secret getting out. Brick says to Amy that Minx knows what's in those files, even if they're destroyed. So she's going to tell him what's in there. So it sounds like he's going to burst in next episode and demand that Minx tell him everything that's in the files. But he's sort of tried that before.
Never really worked before.
She's either lied or made up a story about a fire. So.
Now, it did occur to me that in the real world, Mrs. Corday, or Miss Corday... Cordell, you know, if she was very worried that this might implicate her, and I imagine what she's actually been doing is highly illegal in terms of record archives, might actually make copies of the records before she gave them to Minx to kind of cover herself. But I didn't see any evidence of her actually doing that in the show.
But maybe Brick will go back to her and say, "Oh, I think you've been working with Mrs. Lockridge," and maybe she'll give something up.
Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully Minx and Brick are in the next episode, and Amy's got time off from Buzz's to tag along on this adventure. Well, we've got a Friday episode coming up already, December 20th. So this will be definitely the last day of classes by now. It's weird how little I remember of this next few months when I've, watched probably every episode from now until the end of April. And it will be the 100th episode of the year since July 30th, 31st. Episode number 356. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
I wonder if you'd mind bringing me a martini.
Certainly, Mr. Capwell.
Mr. Cranston.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We've finished episode 356 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Friday, December 20th, 1985. We're at the week before the final full week of Santa Barbara this year, Christmas week. We are at the tail end of week 73. Kelly is angry with Dylan that he's come out to the oil rig, knowing that she was all alone there. They bandage up her hand right quickly, but she ends up arguing with him as usual, and she lets it slip that she thinks he's a lot like Joe, and then backpedals and says, in fact, Joe is a lot more like Nick. But really, you can see that there are some attributes of Joe that Dylan has and some that Nick has. Mm-hmm. Later, she tells Eden she's not sure about marrying Nick, and Eden says, the longer we live, the more doubts we have. So, do you think the wedding will happen with Nick, or will she back out?
Oh, I think it could be one of these things where it starts to go ahead, and then at the last minute she decides not to, or there's some sort of hesitation right before the final vows, or I don't know, maybe it'd be like The Graduate, where she starts having the wedding, then runs off with Dylan. I hope not. I'm
thinking another possibility is Nick calls it off when he walks in on Dylan and Kelly and is on his couch.
That might be a possibility as well, and then there might be a whole thing of Kelly and Nick possibly finding their way back to each other, hopefully after Dylan's death.
I mean, it's possible at some point Janice might even tell Nick when, she keeps noticing things and thinks, well, you can't keep doing this to Nick. So, maybe she puts a bug in his ear.
Yeah, I think there's lots of dramatic possibilities here around it.
It's interesting how clueless Nick is completely about Kelly and Dylan.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting that Dylan is such a blind spot for him, and I know that can happen sometimes, especially if you're older and you're used to taking care of a younger sibling, but Nick has just been screwed every which way by Dylan, so...
Cruz and Santana bring Brandon back to the Capwell house to see Gina, as they promised. She could see him for a few hours on Christmas. And then Cruz agrees to have a drink later with Santana and says, I'm going to go talk to Reuben. So Reuben is invoked in this episode, though of course he does not appear. Cruz attends Sally's apartment because Janice has called the police regarding her stalker, and he checks out the door to see if it's been jimmied, and has some people searching the roof and the basement. But of course, she doesn't have a description. So they're doing something, talking to neighbors too, I think. Mason also comes over because Janice has called him. She mentions she has a hair appointment at the Capwell Hotel, and he asks if she'll meet him later for drinks at the Orient Express. So, a hair appointment at the Capwell Hotel. That makes me think that little area where Jack Stanfield Lee had his law office might have a number of different businesses, that ground floor business section.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's probably one of those full-service hotels that has a little business center and maybe a hair salon, or maybe it's even a slightly more modern one with a bit of a shopping area in it or something.
Makes me think of that little winding thing in the Fontainebleau that we stayed at after our Santa Barbara cruise 2 years ago. Cruz also heads for the Orient Express. A lot of people ending up there. Also there, Mark and Mary, who are dancing, and Mason, of course, comes in, and they stare at each other at various times, and Mason asks Mary if she's still interested in Mason.
Now, once again, we have Mark and Mary hanging out at a Capwell property, and apparently
hoping not to run into
any Capwells and being somewhat alarmed to actually see a Capwell. So.
Next thing you know, they'll move that clinic into the Capwell Hotel. They'll see Capwells 24/7. Eden tells Kirk she doesn't remember pulling the plug, and then maybe there is something to what Cruz said. Kirk says, well, I found you with the plug in your hand. So that's where they leave that. But Kirk has more important things in this episode. He does manage to maneuver Eden into various places throughout the day so that she doesn't see what he's up to. But he is focused on Gina. He notices Gina hiding some presents in Cece's closet. And then after she leaves, checks it out to see if it's big enough for someone to hide in. And lo and behold, it is. And they also have a good view of the plug. He quizzes Brandon about that night at the Capwell Hotel. And Brandon reveals that when he awoke, his mother was trying on dresses. When he asks what color dress she was trying on, he says it was pink.
So we are seeing here, actually, that Kirk is a better investigator than Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
By quite a bit, actually. And, maybe it's just as well Cruz got moved on to another project.
Maybe Inspector Kirk will be a job in his future, if Capwell ever doesn't pan out. Next thing we know, he's in the attic. We finally see the attic, even though months ago Mason, spent a lot of time up there looking for old Channing clippings to try and figure out if maybe there was another murderer. And we see a dressmaker's dummy. That's the most prominent thing in there. And he comes up with a handful of paper and drags a typewriter out of the corner. And he starts typing a note now. Obviously he's in the attic, so we know this is something secretive and possibly dodgy. So this is an exciting turn for Kirk. Doing something perhaps underhanded for once. He tears up his first note because he's not happy with it. But the second note he types up, he leaves it on Gina's steering wheel. And it says, Gina, I saw you in the pink dress. I know you did it. If you want to know more, you'll go to the Orient Express and get the note under the piano bench. And then Kirk types up the second note too and goes to hide it under the piano bench at the Orient Express. And here we have a nice little scene where, as he's hiding it, a waiter comes too close and he's worried he'll be spotted. So he says, oh, could you get me a drink? Or have the bartender make me a drink? And the waiter says, yes, very well, Mr. Capwell. And once again, he corrects someone and says, my name is Cranston, not Capwell. Mm-hmm. I think this is, I have a thing in the back of my head, this is going to be a running thing with Kirk, of Eden being the dominant person in this marriage, which I don't think he deals well with as time goes on. At the Orient Express, Gina finds Mason, Mary, Mark, Cruz, Eden, and Kirk, and wonders which one of them could have left her that note. We don't see her retrieving that note, but later Kirk checks and it's gone. And it turns out Gina has paid off Mark, the maitre d', to bring it down to her in her car. So that's kind of clever. Mark had a lot of scenes with a lot of people. Everyone chatted with him briefly. Janice is meeting me here later. I need a table. Oh, Eden's here. Maybe I'll leave. Okay, no, I'll stay. So the second note says that she forgot about one piece of evidence. She wonders what that could be, not knowing that Kirk has prepared to follow her wherever she goes to potentially hide some evidence. So he wants to know if there's any evidence. Does Gina know? Has Gina hidden it somewhere, and will she go check on it? It's a good ploy. It's very clever. She heads straight to Santana's apartment, and Rosa is there reading a book about Mexico to Brandon. And she manages to strong-arm her way into getting Brandon's bear by saying, "Oh, this'll, remind me of you when I sleep." And Brandon seems to think it's perfectly reasonable. Rosa finds it very dodgy, though. And then Kirk sees that she's got some kind of stuffed animal, and later, we don't know how far off, maybe she's still in the driveway, Gina is looking through the bear, and we see her pull out the wig and the dress and two other things. I thought maybe one might be the other pills. No, those other pills are gone. I don't know what the third item was. And then the fourth item, I think, was probably the cassette tape, because it kind of had a little square shape. The third thing was like lipstick shaped, approximately in size. So I can't think what that might have been. She decides she better destroy them all. I have a feeling Kirk might. If Gina throws the dress into something, and Kirk manages to retrieve it, he'll have proof that the torn piece is not from, that dress, and realize that. No, whose dress has the torn piece? Gina's or Eden's? Gina's. That's right. So Kirk would end up in possession with the too small dress for Eden with the tear out of it.
I'm feeling like we're perhaps going to be seeing the beginning of a sort of Legion of Doom kind of alliance between Gina and Kirk, where Kirk will have this leverage over Gina, but I think they can actually ally to.
They'll have a lot of cross purposes.
And they're both kind of evil and unstable, so that'll be kind of fun.
I think it will. I accidentally saw a clip while I was looking for screenshots that I wish I hadn't seen, but it'll be very fun when it happens. Now Kirk has left Eden all alone with Cruz at the Orient Express, and guess what the pianist decides to play? The Change in Me Is You, and
we hear actually a lot more lyrics than usual.
Yeah, he plays the first round while Cruz dares Eden to dance with him, and she says, "I'm a married woman." And then he starts singing the lyrics, and we hear basically the whole song. And of course, as you might have guessed, they end up dancing for a good percentage of the rest of the show. And that is it for week 73. We've only got, I think, eight days left in the year. And I will give you a mini spoiler. Very soon, someone that everyone thinks is dead will make a miraculous reappearance. So, we'll see if you are surprised by that when it happens.
And is this a character we've seen before?
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
will they be played by
someone
the same?
We've seen on the show that died, on camera.
Okay, will they be played by the same actor? Will we recognize them, or will it be one of those things where everyone says, "Oh, whoever," and you're trying to, piece together?
You'll know who it is immediately.
Cool.
We'll be back after we decorate this place for Christmas, even though it's November 13th. And we're about to do a Zoom chat with Nancy Legron. So that's exciting. We're racing to get this podcast done.
Well, you are. We're too cheap to pay for two people. So. The Uber fan has to be the one who gets it. Yeah.
And then Come and get me if it runs too long, because we've got to go to a dentist appointment too. Anyway, behind the scenes at Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara. So exciting. So we'll decorate something for Christmas, but I don't know which way we'll aim the camera. We'll be back after we watch the December 23rd episode, number 357. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Yes, Rosa?
Goodbye, Gina.
Come to steal family silver, Kirk?